today we will hear more testimonies and tributes by people from all over the world and from all walks of life on their personal experience and collaboration with LaRouche and on how they experience his ideas. So today we will have a large panel consisting of Dennis Small, Diogène, Senny, Josef, Miklosko, Theo Mitchell, Nino Galloni, Hussein, Askary, Claudio, Giudici, and Harley Schlanger. Welcome, everyone. So we will start our presentations with Monsieur. Okay, let me say that some of the speeches, like the first speech, will be in French. Is that correct? Yes. And the speech of Claudio Giudici will be in Italian. So if you don't have translation, please use the opportunity now. Anyway, so we will open our panel with Monsieur Diogène Senny. He is the president of the Ligue Panafrican, Umoja. Umoja is a Swahili word I learned for unity. So his speech will be in defense of African sovereignty, and it's about the role of Pan-Africanism in a multipolar world. Please join our podium, Let us hear your speech, sir.
I want to thank the panelists of yesterday where I had to intervene on the scientific issues. So it will be, this is the planned intervention. The theme of this conference is the future of humanity as a creative species in the universe. Brings us to reflect on several points. First on the ideological, the geopolitical, and then the economic, and at the end I will talk about the space policies. On the geopolitical and ideological question, 1 week ago, day for day, the entire world was celebrating 30 years later of the Berlin Wall, considered as the most important event of the end of the 20th century that has brought many politicians and intellectuals to state that the new era of peace, of happiness and prosperity was opening to humanity. In the same law of series, Mr. Francis Fukuyama, American politician, was more audacious, wrote this famous article on the end of history. What he is saying is that the end of history, the end of the Cold War, is defining the ideological victory of the liberal ideology on other policies. If it's true that this was a major event for a large part of humanity, it's also completely wrong, and that this was the beginning, automatic beginning of prosperity and the triumph of neoliberalism. One has to recognize the fall of the Berlin Wall did not end the cancer which is destroying the modern states, being geopolitics. We should recall that the Berlin Wall was the consequences of the confrontation between the following geopolicies. First, the geopolicy of the oceans, which came mainly from Britain, and to protect itself from France or Germany, the mastery of the oceans and the choke points of international maritime trade, the Baltics, China, Gibraltar, Cape, Suez, Aden, Hormuz, Singapore, Malacca. This geopolitics of the oceans allowed the British Crown to obtain the largest colonial empire. The second geopolitics, which gave birth to the Berlin Wall, was the bunker of Germany and Russia. To speak about Germany, which was a landlocked country, stifled by a Western plutocracy, where Germany had only a couple of interests in Cameroon and Togo, haunted by its vulnerability, where it would not have enough land mass. Its nightmare was to confront an eventual alliance between Britain and France, and also Russia, and it will start building its own vital space empire with Wilhelm II, Bismarck, ending up in the Third Reich. 30 years after the fall of the Berlin Wall, all these old geopolitics have not been suppressed but recycled. The world is full of conflicts, and there is a strong disequilibrium, frightening disequilibrium, which is appearing between those who have production and consumption, and which get rich by the exploitation of the poorest. On an ideological and economical level, for us Africans, the end of the Cold War was a new trick, historical trick, a fake promise, similar to the promise of so-called independencies in the 50s and 60s. 20 years after the so-called independencies of that is in the 80s, the debt crisis, which brought the structural adjustment policies of the IMF, have ruined and destroyed the poor initial rebuilding of post-African independencies. The 90s, inaugurated by the fall of the Berlin Wall, opened a new sequence of deceit for the Africans. The salute is now so-called only of free elections, free elections, free elections, without any idea of real sovereignty. Elections without sovereignty, each time contested, each time it becomes a polemological chaos and war. All these actors of these crises generally applicate the neoliberal Bible of this of Fukuyama, which is the consensus of Washington, the economic program formalized in 1989 by John Williamson, at that time the vice president and chief of the World Bank, which was to aggravate the structural adjustments policies, which meant to wipe out any state regulation in any country, the total free trade of goods and people and capitals, and the instauration of a so-called self-regulated world market. Of course, this all at the detriment of public investment in domains of health, education, and infrastructure. That was so-called the triumph of neoliberalism in the post-Cold War period. In despite all this, Africa has nevertheless developed ambitions in the domain of space for communications, television, radio, internet, GPS, etc. It is a real democratic challenge because it allows to reduce the cost of distribution and to facilitate the access of the fundamental rights for many. There are some countries which are really developing on this: Angola, Nigeria, Ghana, South Africa, and Kenya. Because of the high cost, each country goes to the US, France, Russia, India, and China to obtain its own satellites. That's why for the United States of Africa, the ideal for which we are fighting does make sense. It will settle the issue of cost and the rationalization, but it will not reduce the increasing insecurity when countries obtain their satellites towards the neighbor. We oppose this concept of the end of history by the notion of historicity. Historicity is it's everybody's own privilege of man to have a conscience in the history of man. This brings us to have solidarity and unites the past and the future with the present and motivates the creation of creativity. 30 years after the fall of Berlin, mankind developed its war instinct, with a mathematical and cult instinct. This all can lead us to nuclear mutual destruction of contemporary civilization. 30 years after the fall of the Berlin Wall, the shrewdness and various tricks of so-called transparent elections, which never poses the question of, give no response to the African youth. The African youth is now incarnated by people like Barthélemy Boganda in Central Africa, Tom Mboya in Kenya, Felix Momi and Ruben Niobe in Cameroon, Murtala in Nigeria, Thomas Sankara in Burkina Faso. The contribution of Pan-Africans to peace in the world goes via renaissance of Africa. This renaissance takes its force from the the agrarian myth of humanity, the myth of Osiris. Patient laborers of the valley of the Nile, we have to disseminate the grains and then harvest. The Egyptian monuments repeat infinitely these mysteries, which expose an analogy between the human destiny and the food production. To become free, we have stopped to be human machines and become real human beings. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Schedule complications, we have rearranged the speeches a little bit. The next speech will be given by Josef Miklosko, and he is the former Vice Prime Minister of Czechoslovakia and has also been I think the eldest member of the Slovak Parliament until 2016. He has met LaRouche 3 times in Rome, where he was an ambassador, and he is a mathematician who will speak on LaRouche and science. Please.
Vielen Dank. You applaud, but you don't know what I'm going to say. You're applauding too early, but thanks nevertheless. Dear Helga, dear friends, it has been said that I'm from Slovakia. I want to say something about our situation. Now it is exactly 30 years after our own revolution in the Czechoslovakia, which was in the 17th of November. At that time, the 40 years of communist era were ended, and the Marxism left from our life, and it was the most beautiful day in my life. And therefore I have to attend and speak at an event in Bratislava and have to leave early. Many countries, we're free, and that is important. We're free. We can arrange our life according to our own ideas. We can speak, we can write, we can do things, we can travel. I have been 12 years the president of the Slovak Christian Pensioners, and I have just recently turned this office over to our pensioners. Have a pension of 430 euro in average. But we're alive and we are free. I want to thank Helga Zepp and the Schiller Institute to speak at this interesting conference. Lyndon LaRouche was an American Sakharov, a political economist, an author, wrote dozens of books and thousands of articles. He generated new ideas, and he fought for the defense of Christianity and the family and life. I met him in total 17 times in America, in Germany, 3 times in Rome, where I was ambassador. He said that the United States of Europe were missing a vision where it's not only all about money and business, but the important thing was the spiritual and moral values. In my book, we were I mentioned Lyndon LaRouche and spent 90 pages on him, and has many pictures, and I will give a copy to Helga at the end of my speech. And there are many other materials where I wrote about LaRouche. His ideas moved him to in the United States, and they provoked a lot of critic and defamation in the United States and Germany. He was persecuted in the United States. There was on the 6th of October 1986, the then government tried to eliminate him with 400 policemen and to shut down his organization and to kill Lin. This created a political process that was not justified punishment. We had just a liberation from communism, and at the same time, Lin was sentenced to 15 years of prison, and his friends had 209 years in total in punishment. He and his colleagues at the end of the 1980s there were so many irregularities in this process that the international community protested and pointed to the fact that it was a political persecution. I was confronted with this situation as the vice president of my government, responsible for human rights. I wrote a lot of protest letters to the highest authorities in the United States, and I'm proud that I have helped Lin to get Lin out of prison in 1994, 5 years after he went to prison. And later also to the liberation of the other Virginia 5, the prisons of the LaRouche organization. I have visited all of them in the prison, and I report on that in the book. In September 1995, I was involved in a hearing in Washington. The International Tribunal, led by prominent lawyers and judges, and they heard Ramsey Clark, former Attorney General of the United States in the Johnson government. The commission came to the conclusion that in this process there was gross misconduct of justice, and that the whole persecution had the idea to eliminate Lin and his political movement. On September 8, 1997, Lyndon LaRouche celebrated his 75th birthday in Washington, and there were prominent singers, musicians, and politicians who spoke at the event, and I was I conducted the ceremonies at that, and I have never had an event with so many people from the Metropolitan Opera, and we sang with them "Glory, Glory, Hallelujah." It was wonderful. I have a lot of pictures, and my grandchildren were always very impressed with this. I have 13 grandchildren and 5 great-grandchildren, and I'm married for 55 years. And when there's a celebration, and my and my wife says, we're married 55 years, but 5 years you're not at home. When he talked about politics, Lynn did not hold back his opinion. He said that politics and economics must be bound to moral principles. He developed the SDI. He developed development projects for Europe, Asia, and Africa. He called for canceling the debt of Latin America, and he had projects to develop Eastern Europe. His proposal for the reform of the financial system were an alternative. He projected that the crisis that the speculation would cause a crisis, and the printing of all that money in the United States and Europe that is called quantitative easing, the helicopter money. Now, the $60 billion every day are being printed to keep the system afloat. And that brings the interest down, and it directs the money into the bad system of speculation. They save the bad banks, and the financial system is totally separated from the productive economy. When I was lobbying in the Congress, I called I told my friends that I'm going to this conference, and he said, give my greetings to Helga and tell her that every prognosis of Lynn has come true. This is the premier of the Czechoslovakia. On every year in October, we celebrate and come together. The Christian politicians from Czechia and Slovakia come together, and we will talk about that. I have 6 times visited Lynn and the other imprisoned members of his movement in the American prisons. In 1994, the Slovakia was the second country that Lynn visited after he was released. In his second visit in 1996, he wrote, the Slovakia is a happy country, happier than others. It has a sense for the spiritual values not lost. It has a national identity, and it needs honest and decisive leaders. There was recently an event with 50,000 people meeting in Nitra and singing. I understood that this is a good country. But we still need those, and we're still missing the honest and decisive leaders. And we have the pilgrims. There are 20 places in Slovakia where the pilgrims meet, and there's one where 500,000 people came together. In Lynn made a number of proposals. I want to mention some of them, but they are still valid. There are several basic tenets. It's a dangerous time of a financial crisis, and we have to take measures to stop the collapse of civilization. Every nation must insist that there is no higher political authority than the sovereign nation-state republic. Supranational institutions like the International Monetary Fund, who have any authority, but only as a forum of consultation between sovereign nation-states. Every nation must keep its own sovereignty in regards to its financial, monetary, and economic affairs. That's the principle. In the crisis, we need a credit system. We need state credits to create infrastructure and develop the productive sector, agriculture, and the world trade, and there should be interest rates of at most 1 to 2% per year. And the bad debt must be cancelled. We need international agreements, but for that we don't need international organizations and authorities. The world economy is being suffocated by supranational institutions. Lynn has also proposed a new Bretton Woods agreement. You all know that, but we need fixed but adaptable exchange rates. We need to have the ability to limit convertibility. For me as a layman, it is clear that it's not moral if somebody becomes as much money for a few days of speculation than other people through honest work through the whole life. The collapse of American hedge funds and Enron and other institutions, all that are just the tip of the iceberg. No, some other sentence at the end of my speech, but they're not so known, but for me as a Christian, have a few theses, and some people may be surprised that Lynn said it this way. Lynn was a Christian, and he talked about that. And I want to quote some of these ideas. A man is created as the image of God, and that has a very high positive value. We must stop killing of unborn children and also of the born children through drugs and other things. Everything is decided during childhood. You must educate children toward creativity. Today, nobody has time for children. They have TV and internet, and they're making children stupid. I don't look TV, but on the internet quite a bit. Uh, Post a lot on Facebook, unfortunately. But what should I do? But if somebody is a friend, then we can talk about that. Also, at this conference, I have sent out a few. If you're not in the internet, you don't exist. Pardon. The world kills the souls of the children. You have to protect the families. The most important is in education is classical music, history, and mathematics. We have published in Slovakia some memoirs of priests that are very critical and speak very openly. And that is very important, because if these people die in 100 years, everything is different. But in the last 1-2 years, I have always said that you have to know about the history and you have to speak the truth about history, because the truth shall make us free. The best cultures of Europe developed out of Christianity. Uneducated people don't know anything about history, culture, economics, and art. Only stupid people believe that things are as they're reported in the press and in the TV. In Slovakia, we have a lot of papers, but now the owners decide what is printed. Some you cannot read at all, and everything is half lies and half truths. So it's important that you have the internet to set things straight. The ideology of hedonism is sick. Free market violates the weak and destroys agriculture, industry, and finances. The third way in the economy is an economic policy based on Christian principles. Money, anti-culture, and the unlimited freedom sends people into the prison. The commentator on lies are lies. If one axiom is wrong, like in mathematics, then everything that is based on that axiom is also wrong. Let's start a revolution of Christian love, as the Good Samaritan. And the last one is poetic. What is the aim of man? They come into the world as angels, and they should leave the world as angels. This is what Lynn has said. Dear friends, that's the end of my speech. Let's remember Lyndon. He will always be in our hearts. And now I want to give Helga these books, and I want to make a little comment on it. This is the book, 10 years later. This is from 99. And 90 pages from that book are about Lynn. Unfortunately, it's in Slovakian. And here is an article on Lynn. And I want to make a picture, because otherwise nobody will believe that I was here. this is our publication of the pensioners, and I got this yesterday. This is a lot of.
Very good. Very good. Yeah.
Ich danke dir, ich danke dir, Josef, und ich möchte euch allen sagen,
I thank you, Josef, very much, and I can say that the hours we spent with him in the Slovakia are among the nicest moments in our life. We had a youth camp when Lynn came out of prison. I think, I don't know how, 100 youths from 30 or 40 countries came together from Eastern Europe, Western Europe, Africa. And we had the idea that what yesterday Megan and Sebastian said, we had in 1994, we had set this in motion. And this was a fantastic time. Josef is a humanist. He is a human being like a model for all people in Europe and beyond that. At midnight we had climbed up a tower, and then Josef made a salto mortale backwards 20 years ago. And he said he still can do that. I don't want to challenge him on that. But he's not only a human being with a big spirit and heart, but also is very sportive. So thank you very, very much. Thank you. I have immunity, and I sent a message that my flight has postponed a little bit. We have a house of Slovakian scientists, and we have a company, and people from all of Europe, also a lot of Russians, come together. At the end of, I'm playing still sports, and I'm still somewhat fit. It's important that one of the Russians there should be a specter on the tower, and I motivated him to take on a white clothes when Lyndon LaRouche's people came around. He should be a monster, but he drank a little bit too much vodka. So I had to be the monster. And nobody was was afraid of me, I think.
Thank you very much. I don't know if the next speaker was one of the persons that you have personally met in the prison, but the next speaker will be one of the former political prisoners with Lyndon LaRouche. He is the Latin American coordinator for the Schiller Institut, and his name is Dennis Small. Please welcome Dennis Small. His speech will have the name "The Power of Reason, the Living Legacy of Lyndon LaRouche."
Helga Zepp LaRouche, ladies and gentlemen, old friends and new. I'm especially glad to be here today to share with you the discussion and carrying forward of the task of the living legacy of Lyndon LaRouche. Earlier this year, on the 30th anniversary of Lyndon LaRouche going to jail on January 27th, 1989, to serve 5 years of a 15-year sentence for crimes he never committed and which the British and the Bush administration forces that threw him in prison knew perfectly well that he never committed, the LaRouche Organization internationally relaunched our long-standing demand that LaRouche must be exonerated. When Lyndon passed away less than 3 weeks later on February 12th of 2019, and we decided to redouble our efforts for exoneration, even some among our friends and supporters told us very sympathetically, it's true he was treated unjustly, but that's now water under the bridge. It's time to move on and focus your energies on solving the problems the world faces: the global economic crisis, the perpetual wars and danger of thermonuclear confrontation, and the moral and cultural crisis facing our youth, including drugs. Those well-meaning people could not be more wrong. The exoneration of Lyndon LaRouche is the central strategic issue of our time. It is true that the LaRouche case involved, in the memorable words of his appeal lawyer and former U.S. Attorney General Ramsey Clark, and I quote, "a broader range of deliberate and systematic misconduct and abuse of power over a longer period of time in an effort to destroy a political movement and leader than any other federal prosecution in my time or to my knowledge," close quote. It is also the case that a number of LaRouche's associates were sentenced to prison terms ranging up to 77 years in a series of related federal and state prosecutions. But the greatest travesty of justice was the one done against the peoples and the nations of the world, and against the very concept of man, which has been the central commitment of LaRouche's life's work. In his allocution before Judge Albert Bryan, prior to sentencing on January 27, 1989, LaRouche warned, and I quote, "This group of trials, by shotgun methods, is an attempt to eliminate me from the political scene. This has already done great damage to the United States. The time has come that this evil and reckless prosecution be brought to a halt before much greater damage is done to our United States," close quote. That damage, however, was done, depriving the American people of their most illustrious statesman and economist, the adoption of whose policies over the last 50 years would have made the world an entirely different place than it is today. It is that injustice which must now be undone if the planet is to survive. Justice for the man means justice for his ideas. I hope to give you a sense of both by showing you brief excerpts of LaRouche's last public speech before going to jail and of his first speech upon release 5 years later. I ask you to think of the mind that could produce those two bookend speeches. So, what was Lyndon LaRouche's crime? He proved Satan was wrong. Let me explain. In 1998, LaRouche published an autobiography titled The Power of Reason. Not the power of money or the power of the media, and certainly not the power of positive thinking. The very first words of the author's foreword to that book explain, and I quote Lyndon, "During the course of the past nearly 20 years, I have become perhaps the most controversial among the influential international figures of this decade. Unlike all of the other leading candidates for the US presidency since 1945, I am an influential original thinker," close quote. LaRouche proved that true knowledge does not derive from sense perception, but rather from man's mind. Man's creative powers are the most powerful force for good in the universe, and they find their expression in his unique ability to endlessly increase his potential relative population density. As LaRouche himself summarized this central discovery in a November 1993 essay, which you also heard from Jason yesterday with this quote, and if I can make this work, we'll see it again. There we go. "The central feature of my original contribution to the Leibniz science of physical economy is the provision of a method for addressing the causal relationship between, on the one side, individuals' contributions to axiomatically revolutionary advances in scientific and analogous forms of knowledge, and, on the other side, consequent increases in the potential population density of corresponding societies." Close quote. Doing the good, for Lynn, was identical with rigorous scientific truth. The same creativity which bends the stars like reeds, as he once wrote, endows man with free will and thus morality, which finds no greater happiness than in doing the good. Everyone who knew Lynn knows that he had an abiding love of truth, love of humanity, love of doing the good, and love of a good fight. In his final speech before his December 16, 1988 conviction, delivered scarcely 1 week earlier to the Food for Peace conference in Chicago, LaRouche was unswerving. May I have the first video, please?
There is no part of society, no constituency, which does not have the same interest. There is the people of no nation has any different interest than that of any other nation in this matter. We're speaking of the future of hundreds of billions of unborn souls, without whose success our lives mean nothing. That is the common interest which unites each and every one of us, such that there is no distinction among any of us on this issue, on this cause, on this interest. If we fight so, if we fight with love of humanity, by thinking especially of those hundreds of billions of souls waiting to be born, and thinking also of those whose martyrdom and other sacrifice gave us what was our potential and our debt to them, respecting what we pass on to the future. And if we think of our lives not as something lived from moment to moment, but as a very small piece of experience, with a beginning and not too much later an end. And think of our lives not as things which are lived for pleasure in and of themselves, but as an opportunity to fulfill a purpose which is reflected in what we bequeath to those hundreds of billions of souls waiting to be born in their condition. Such that if we at any point were to cut short our mortal life by spending it in a way which ensured the cause of those hundreds of billions of souls yet to be born, we could walk to death with joy because we had completed our life, fulfilled it. We might have been denied a chance of fulfilling it a little bit more, but nonetheless, we had fulfilled it. We are each little, we are each individual. But if we know we're united to this effect, then we know that what each of us as an individual does in this united way will be cause to prosper. Thus, in this terrible moment of humanity, when civilization as we've known it for hundreds of years threatens to be removed from us in the coming 2 to 10 years or so, we have the risk of losing civilization. But we also have the possibility of a heroic solution to this crisis, of becoming generations which in our time, faced with the cup of Gethsemane, accepted it and thus perpetuated in the imitation of Christ the cause of the salvation of future souls.
And from there, Lynn went to jail for 5 years. In this commitment, Lyndon LaRouche was the quintessential American. I will prove that to you by citing the words and the thinking of that other quintessential American, the philosophical founder of our constitutional republic, Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. In his 1702 Meditation on the Common Concept of Justice, Leibniz wrote, "Justice is goodness conformed to wisdom, and wisdom, in my sense, is nothing else than the science of felicity. Not the hedonistic pleasure-seeking that the likes of Hobbes and Bentham had promoted. One must shun the pleasures of the senses as one shuns a stranger, or sooner, a flattering enemy," Leibniz wrote in the 1690s. Thus, the sovereign wisdom has so well regulated all things that our duty must also be our happiness. And true happiness is the exercise of our will to act always according to our understanding and the advancement of the common good. For only so much of our life is to be valued as truly living as the good we do in it. Now, this Leibnizian outlook permeated the thinking of the founding fathers of the United States, including Cotton Mather, the most prolific intellectual figure in the colonial America, whose most gifted protege was none other than Benjamin Franklin. Mather wrote in his 1710 Essays to Do Good, "It is an invaluable honor to do good. It is an incomparable pleasure. A man must look upon himself as dignified and gratified by God when an opportunity to do good is put into his hands. He must embrace it with rapture, as enabling him to answer the great end of his being." And like Leibniz, Mather was emphatic in his assault against hedonism. Rulers who make no use of their higher station than to swagger over their neighbors and command their obsequious flatteries and enrich themselves with the spoils of which they are able to pillage them, and then wallow in sensual and brutal pleasures, these are the basest of men. Thus, the Declaration of Independence of the United States has a Leibnizian invocation of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Not life, liberty, and the pursuit of as much sensual and brutal pleasure as I can cram into my meaningless existence. Compare this truly human outlook to the bestial identity of man violently promoted by the British Empire and its exponents, such as the Aristotelian Thomas Hobbes, who in his 1651 Leviathan wrote the following: "There is no conception in a man's mind which has not at first, totally or by parts, been begotten upon the organs of sense. And since that's all man knows, every man is an island unto himself. To this war of every man against every man, this also is consequent, that nothing can be unjust. The notions of right and wrong, justice and injustice have there no place." And that in turn led Hobbes to his overt defense of evil. Private appetite is the measure of good and evil. Felicity is a continual progress of the desire from one object to another. Ever met anyone like that? So, if man is thus defined by his senses and his bestial appetites, then he can easily be turned into a slave, Hobbes argued, by offering him sufficient pleasure or money and promising to minimize his pain. You may be familiar with an earlier formulation of this same view. Every man has his price. Does anyone know who the author of this statement is? Any guesses? No? You've heard it. Yeah, Satan. But Satan, you see, is wrong. Now, to understand why the exoneration of Lyndon LaRouche is the overriding strategic issue of our time, consider where the world would be had LaRouche's policies been adopted. Let's limit our attention to two policy areas. First, what Lynn called the Leibniz science of physical economy. Hundreds of millions of people who have died or been ravaged by extreme poverty and disease over recent decades would today be alive, prospering, and contributing to mankind's development had LaRouche's financial and economic reforms, his 4 laws, been implemented when he first proposed them back in the 1970s. Consider what has happened with world poverty since 1981. Over the last 37 years, China has lifted some 850 million people out of poverty, according to World Bank figures. That is more than 10% of the entire human race that is now in a position to make a valuable contribution to mankind's productivity and help shape its future. In the rest of the world, there are still over 600 million people living in extreme poverty. China went from having 46% of the world's poor people in 1981 to 5% in 2017 to essentially 0% today. Not only has poverty been wiped out in China, but the population is large and growing, and its life expectancy has increased over the last 5 decades from 44 years to 76 years. Add to that the overall rise in educational and scientific capabilities of that growing population, as reflected in parameters such as a rising literacy rate that has far outstripped the world average, and a clearer picture emerges of a nation with the planet's most rapidly rising potential relative population density. That, and not GDP, is the true metric of physical economic potential, as Lyndon LaRouche repeatedly demonstrated. China, and not the United States, is the #1 economy in the world, measured by LaRouche's breakthrough concepts in physical economy, potential relative population density. So, if China can do it, Why not we? China's economic policies are essentially those of Leibniz, Mather, Hamilton, and LaRouche, with Chinese characteristics. Instead, in the transatlantic sector, we have tolerated the imposition of genocidal IMF policies, and also on that in developing sector nations, and also of Malthusian green policies, and of endless bailouts of the $1.8 quadrillion speculative financial bubble, which now threatens to blow out the entire international financial system. I apologize to the interpreters. The earlier version of my speech said $1.5 quadrillion, but in the 2 weeks since I sent in the text, the financial bubble has grown to $1.8 quadrillion. And let's speak quickly because it's going to be 2 quadrillion very soon if the world financial system survives, not by any means guaranteed. So LaRouche not only forecast the breakdown crisis of the transatlantic system like no other economist, he also provided detailed programmatic studies for every region of the planet with the policies required to launch a scientific renaissance. A second policy area, cooperation among the US and other great powers to push forward the frontiers of man's scientific knowledge with fusion-powered space exploration and colonization. LaRouche's SDI, adopted as policy by President Ronald Reagan in 1983, was a detailed proposal to put an end to the era of British geopolitics, perennial wars, and threatened thermonuclear annihilation by initiating cooperation between the United States and the Soviet Union on new physical principles for missile defense and broader civilian applications. Because that policy was defeated by the British in the mid-1980s, the planet has remained in the clutches of British Hobbesian policies of manipulated war of each against all, with millions upon millions of lives wrecked by war, forced migration, terrorism, and the like, especially in Southwest Asia and Africa. Had LaRouche's policy been adopted, mankind today would be well into the fusion era, and we would probably already have the first human colonies on Mars. Youth would not be facing a future of drugs, countercultural decay, and the pursuit of ever more degrading pleasures du jour, courtesy of Satan and his internet. But they would be training as astronauts, engineers, and classical musicians. They would be thinking of how to do good with their lives. In short, the exoneration of Lyndon LaRouche of his ideas will have a revolutionary effect on mankind's future, equivalent to the impact that the reintroduction of Plato had when introduced to Europe on the Golden Renaissance, as Helga Zepp LaRouche has emphasized. It is with that in mind that we have established the LaRouche Legacy Foundation, which will shortly begin publishing LaRouche's collected works and preparing a digital archive of his life's work. The mission of the foundation is to help, to help bequeath to future generations the living legacy of Lyndon LaRouche, to, quote, further the scientific and literary work of the American physical economist Lyndon LaRouche Jr., help achieve international familiarity with his work and further his scientific advances for the purpose of furthering an understanding and appreciation for physical economy, physical science, historiography, the role of classical culture in nurturing and enhancing human creativity, and other related fields. Let us close by listening to Lynn himself discussing the power of reason. This is from the first speech he delivered after being released from prison at a Schiller Institute conference in the United States on February 19th, 1994.
Freedom and economic development are interdependent. They're the same thing. What is economic development? Is it having something? Is it cargo cult? Economic development is utilizing the principle of the human mind. Remember, all of this business about humanity and force and so forth. The only power that humanity has lies within that which makes man individually in the image of the Creator. The power of creative reason. The only thing that differentiates man in science from an animal is reason. The power to make scientific and artistic discoveries, to develop man's behavior through these conceptions, these discoveries. The only power and the greatest power in the temporal universe is the power of ideas. Not formulas, not recipes, not force, but ideas. The only reason the human race has survived what it has survived. Ideas. That's the force we use. The power of economy lies entirely in ideas, in scientific and related discoveries, which give man increased power over nature. There is no possibility of development without the expression of the freedom to generate, to transmit, to assimilate, and to practice better ideas. Development and freedom are the same thing because they both involve the freedom of ideas for change. Not libertarianism, not the right to change your sex 10 times a day, but the right to use your mind to develop, assimilate, develop, and apply different choices of ideas to improve human practice, morally and physically. That is what economic development is, which requires infrastructure. You're not going to develop a desert by sitting there and having ideas. You must have water. You must build, therefore you must use reason to get yourself water. You require power. You must have power. You must have sanitation. You must have all these other things. What happens then, as in this situation in South America and elsewhere, and in the United States, and in the British Isles, and on the continent of Europe, and in Russia, and in Eastern Europe, and in China, and elsewhere soon tomorrow, that around this world people are faced with the reality that what has happened cannot continue. And they are looking and will be looking for the ideas. And there are people I know throughout Black Africa who are very well aware of what we're doing and who would respond, who have tried to respond in the past, but they're terrified. And my being in prison didn't give them any courage either. Because they said, look at that fellow, he's the only fellow in the United States who is for this, and they stuck him in prison. He's finished. There's no one to turn to, they said. Well, I'm free. I may be dead tomorrow, but I'm free today. And we know how to win, and we shall win. But we do not have the almighty power to decree when victory will occur. We must do what we should do to bring about victory and have confidence that the opportunity will be presented to us. We will have the opportunity. Let us be prepared. Let us be persistent. Let us work through frustrations and defeats. Let nothing deter us. We will fight, and we will fight until we win, because that is our duty, and that is our hope, and that will become our victory, whether we live to see it or not.
Thank you very much.
Liebe Freunde, ich muss Abschied nehmen, aber das ist nie wichtig. Wichtig ist, dass eine kleine...
Dear friends, I have to leave, but I have to say something about this last speech. I've never met such a educated man like Lyndon LaRouche. I've met him in Rochester in the prison in the United States, where we have talked for 6 hours. And at the conference like that, was prepared without perfectly, and he answered perfectly all questions on Leibniz, on Kashmir, on Japan, on China, on Russia, on the encyclica, on mathematics, and so forth. About superconductivity. He knew everything. I don't know how it was.
Thank you very much. Let's continue with the next speech, which will be given by former state senator of South Carolina, Mr. Theo Mitchell. And his speech has the title, "The Man Who Should Have Been President of the United States."
I certainly want to say that it's a pleasure being here, being amongst old friends, those who were victims of the rocket docket, and some of us who went to jail anyway. Arthur Slinger, Dennis, and all the sacrifices they made as far as working with land and still with the movement. I want to say it's a pleasure being here in the presence of the distinguished and honorable Helga LaRouche. Among many of you, the supporters who took it upon yourselves to pressure the Department of Justice for the release of Lyndon in 5 years, notwithstanding some of the indignities that he had to suffer and the adherence to a probation that he never broke, even with FBI agents in his midst and in the movement. So we all understand that he was a dangerous man as far as politics in the United States was concerned, that was reaching across the water, touching a whole lot of people. A man before his time. That's in essence what he was. A man born before his time. One of the greatest prognosticators that this century has ever enjoyed having. I'm honored to be here in Frankfurt to commemorate the life of one of the world's greatest prognosticators of any of our lives, Dr. Lyndon LaRouche. No matter as to how one may have felt about him in the past while maybe down, Lyndon had a way to lift us up. With a photographic memory in mind, Lyndon told us the reality of our existence, quote, to be kind to each other. He was a Christian gentleman and exemplified it. Every conference that I attended, whether or not it was the reality of our existence in a, quote, a moral lag in the development of the nation in the heart of America, per the writing of Dr. Gunnar Myrdal, the Swedish philosopher. The Negro problem, in his book, An American Dilemma, acknowledged the circumstances as to our existence. If I may deviate just a second, his philosophy was that in exposing a continuing undercurrent in regards to the Department of Justice and the FBI, and that was to control the black in politics, among others. Time after time, Lynn, as we called him, championed the cause of the many regarding the collapse of the morally and defensible practices wholly inconsistent with the United States Constitution, even going to prison for such. His head may have been blooded, but it was never bowed. Lynn begged for nothing from anybody, and he even refused to relax his feet from the prison shoes he was made to wear for 5 years while incarcerated. Prison boots, very uncomfortable, I know, I wore. Lynn knew something had to be done to correct patent wrongs. The question was, by whom? Thus the LaRouche movement. Now understand we're talking about a foundation. Another move up the ladder, which infected thousands, then and now with the, quote, the right stuff. No, Helga, some of us will never forget having been taught by Lynn that in the end, people like Don Fowler, the former chairman of the Democratic National Committee, will too pay for the jealousy in denying Lynn his righteous place on ballots in various and sundry states that he had won, who in my opinion was the best candidate for the office of President of the United States of America. He and his cronies kept Lynn off the ballot as a candidate in the election years of 1980, 84, 88, 92, 96, and 2000. Now, I'm talking about Don Fowler. You can quote me on that in the paper. Call his name. Even though he always received matching funds, he was a legitimate candidate, having won primaries in Louisiana, additionally in 2000 in Arkansas, wherein he took, Fowler that is, took Lynn's delegates and gave them to Al Gore. I think some of y'all might remember that, who never took the state of Arkansas, Bill Clinton's state, as he refused to support from the former president of the United States, Bill Clinton. Consequently, he lost that state and eventually lost the presidency. Former United States Attorney General Ramsey Clark, who later represented Lynn, as well as I, after getting out of jail, said that Lynn had, quote, courage and resilience. Further, he went on to say that Lynn had great integrity and honorable standing, that he only wanted to improve America, not destroy it. Mr. Clark went on to say that the Democratic National Committee under Fowler was underhanded, hypocritical, backstabbing, and clandestine in keeping Lynn off the ballots in several states that he won. Lyndon, having passed this way, appears to have been, quote, divinely inspired. For example, his prediction on the health care that eventually came has some true, and his prediction on the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which essentially paved the way for the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which gave me and other people who look like me the right to vote. Caused the United States Constitution to be upheld. He made the Constitution speak. Lynn further attacked Jim Crow in the South, which came true as a result of his work. We now have more black elected members of legislative bodies around the United States since Reconstruction. Eventually, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Operation Frumental Doctrine, which means primitive man, ape man. That was their doctrine, to prosecute and persecute the black man and woman, of course. Was a mechanism that killed off black elected officials, believing that they were inferior intellects, having no morals or character, and that the white majority should honor or respect. This came to light by Lynn. Black elected officials were being systematically investigated under indictment or incarcerated in gross numbers. Helga, there must always be the effort to exonerate Lynn. For he did nothing wrong except tell the truth and do the right thing, for which evildoers could neither accept nor understand. They put Satan up there, I believe. And he fought Satan very effectively. This challenge of Wall Street seemingly was the straw that broke the camel's back when he attacked the International Monetary Fund, laid at the feet of Wall Street, where the greedy or sinister individuals seemingly conspired to destroy him. His attacks on the housing industry and social policies were even attacked by his own Democratic Party. Lynn, too, predicted the fall of the Berlin Wall. Great prognosticator. In closing, I want to say that it's very difficult to talk about a man that was a real man without stepping on some other toes or duplicating what some of the things have been said. We gather here today to honor a real man whose life was dedicated to helping his fellow man, who displayed unexpected courage in very trying times. Yes, even now, Lynn's work isn't over. Time has proven and will continue to prove that he was right, and his people will eventually enjoy his having been here amongst us. So was Lyndon LaRouche's greatness for the United States of America. One day he'll be appreciated. The answer is yes, and it has manifested itself many times over. Time I have here, of course, is too short to enumerate all of his successes, and I believe that the former Prime Minister has done an excellent job in outlining some of the things that Lynn did. But the main thing is that in praising Lynn, we cannot forget the lady who stood by him and was chief in contributing to his success. That was Helga LaRouche. who should have been one of the first ladies, if not the Chancellor of Germany. God bless you.
Thank you, Senator. I want to endorse your call to have Helga as the German Chancellor. It would do this country much good. So let's move on to the next speech, which will be given by Nino Galloni from Italy. He has held several positions in Italian governments, especially in the budget planning and labor ministries. And his speech is titled Fatherland, Nation and State as Seen by Progressive Catholics and by Lyndon LaRouche. Please, podium is yours. Oh, okay.
No problem. No problem. Good morning, everybody. In my speech, I would like to address and demonstrate the modernity of the thinking of two major representatives of Italian progressive Catholicism, such as Luigi Sturzo and Giuseppe Dossetti, and by a Christian thinker, Lyndon LaRouche, whose figure and brilliance we celebrate today. Indeed, I have known and frequently met Lyndon himself and his collaborators in every part of Europe and the planet in the course of about 20 years. Instead, I met Dossetti just 2 times, and I never met Sturzo. But my father, a statesman who played a crucial role in the history of the Italian Republic and an internationally recognized scholar in political and agricultural science, as well as an estimator and friend of LaRouche's, was a follower and a pupil of Dossetti, although with some criticism which are little known about Sturzo. After the assassination of DC leader Aldo Moro in 1978, the Italian politics split in 2 blocks. A right-wing one, close to Sturzo, and a left-wing one, which looked at Dossetti, but in a reductionist way. Both factions, which alternated as government in the past 30 years, have been incapable of understanding national needs and have led us throughout a steady worsening of things. The difference between Sturzo and Dossetti will be evident in the following treatment and cannot be solved unless throughout what I call the LaRouche solution. I will proceed orderly with the aim to be clearly understood. This is not an easy task, but it is necessary to establish whether Catholics can push their own view of economic questions, which is anti-free market, but does not confuse St. Francis with the Prince of Edinburgh. When Benito Mussolini took power in 1922, thanks to the support, among others, of the Crown, future Christian Democratic leader Alcide De Gasperi backed him because he thought Mussolini could help to reestablish the state of law, which had been eroded during the 4 years after the end of the World War I. Sturzo instead was very hostile from the beginning because he saw in Mussolini's radical socialism the effort of putting the state, the big Leviathan, and the state authority on top of everything. So on, as fascism dropped the act with the assassination of socialist deputy Giacomo Matteotti in 1924, things became clear. Luigi Sturzo became Mussolini's enemy #1 and had to flee in exile. At the end of the Second World War, a referendum vote established the Republic as a state form. Sturzo was very critical towards the contents of the constitutional chart, drafted 1 year later, despite the fact that such contents, strongly influenced by Dossetti, were not much different from the contents of the very Sicilian statutes Sturzo had earlier approved. Dossetti's work was aimed in a dialogue with the other political forces which had played a determining role in the anti-fascist struggle, to have the central government play an active role in social, economic, anti-war, educational policy, etc. Of special importance is Article 3 of the Constitution. It shall be the duty of the Republic to remove those obstacles of an economic or social nature which constrain the freedom and the equality of citizens, thereby impeding the full development of the human person and the effective participation of all workers in the political, economic, and social organization of the country. Sturzo, instead, saw this as being a prerogative of privates and the family first, of local authorities secondly, and only ultimately of the state, of the central government. On this, he relied on the subsidiarity principle, often pushed in papal encyclicals. Dossetti and the 1948 Constitution turned this approach upside down, acknowledging that the government must provide for responding to the needs of the people and the society as a priority. Sturzo's opposition to the role of a central government was also based on an alleged continuity with fascism, which, after the 1929 crisis, had bailed out private interest and nationalized a large sector of the economy. But the state conglomerates and agencies like IRI, ENI, Cassa per il Mezzogiorno, Svimez, etc., could now be used in the framework of a philosophy that was established in the 30s with Franklin Delano Roosevelt and rejected the liberal approach according to which the market solves all problems in the economy. The federal Delano Roosevelt lesson was applied in the post-war period, but was totally forgotten several decades later. In the 80s, free market policy dealt with the problems determined by the growth of international markets by killing growth. Thus Sturzo, after the end of the World War II, kept his free market and autonomist positions, even criticizing, as we have seen, the 1948 Constitution, which inspired the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, pushed mostly by Eleanor Roosevelt. With the return of free market policies in the United States and Europe at the end of the 70s, especially after the Tokyo G7 in 1979, which dismantled the last bulwark of the 1944 Bretton Woods agreements that had ensured 35 years of extraordinary economic and political development, the split between the Sturziani and the Dossettiani became even more serious. The left pushed the social program inspired by Dossetti, but failed to produce the means to support those programs. The right-wing measured Sturzo's liberal approach to dismantle universal welfare in favor of residual welfare, aid for the poor, to dismantle national industrial strategies and had made Italy great, and to eliminate a useful role of government in the economy, research and infrastructural progress. However, Dossetti was in favor of overcoming the nation states in name of a perspective ecumenism, a proposition that ended to be part of the project of dismantling national states pushed by big corporations and by the centers of financial power. Thus, Dossetti was the main inspirator of the Council Ecumenic Vaticano II. This is important to understand. Thus, after the assassination of Moro, Italian politics seemed to stop understanding and shaping change, and instead went back to file the free market policies. And the Catholic world, no longer able to express a political force in line with Italian traditions, different from more conservative ones in the European countries, become more and more divided and unimportant due to the incapacity of choosing between Sturzo's anti-statalist and Dossetti's globalist views. Some encyclicals and some popes defended the principles of the church social doctrine, but free market economists dominated the Catholic world. It was on this background and to deal with general strategies that I was introduced to Lyndon LaRouche, a major collaboration and a friendship ensued, involving also my father and my entire family. We come therefore to the LaRouche solution, consisting of combining economic development perspectives in which the state plays a major and appropriate role, but without provoking that aggressive and racist nationalism which allegedly led to world wars. In fact, Lyndon LaRouche starts from the 1748 Treaty of Westphalia. All states are sovereign, superiorem non reconnoscentes, and, this is the point, they respect others' sovereignty. In other terms, once each state has defined its national sovereignty, it admits the same situation for its neighbor. It respects it and does not intend to subdue it on the basis of a putative superiority. Wars occur when an exaggerated growth of potentialities intersects a culture of superiority of a nation over another nation. If the economic policy is not achievement-oriented and the policy as such is based on some superiority, the potential is unloaded against the neighbor, including in a military way. Therefore, the USA made a mistake after World War I when they imposed a debt on Germany, unleashing the dynamic of frustrated potentialities and the feeling of revenge that produces Nazism, or in Italy, the so-called crippled victory, la vittoria mutilata, that was among the fundamental basis of fascism. The different behavior of the United States toward Germany, Japan, and Italy after the Second World War was therefore the foundation of the current Pax Europea. But in the European Union, northern racism towards the south has eventually prevailed and has provoked an insufficient development of southern potential and imbalances within the European Union itself. LaRouche's defense of the institution of the nation states is not based on ideological premises, but on the scientific assessment that the nation state is the best form of organization of human society. The nation state does not grow out of ethnical, geographical, or political factors, but, according to LaRouche, from a cultural factor. As he often remarked, using the example of Dante Alighieri, a nation state is based on a cultural language, able to convey deep and impassioned thoughts in art and science. Such indispensable tool of social relations defines a community, a people, a nation. Since the ultimate source of productivity in economics is human creativity, in the sense of capacity for scientific discovery and this implementation in the form of technology, the promotion and the defense of culture as expressed in a cultural language is key for human progress. Government and the political representations are not conceivable outside or against this view. Therefore, LaRouche's effort in economic science was to investigate how productivity, as understood as the capacity for scientific discovery and development and the use of technology, can be promoted at best and at most in a national community, as defined by cultural form of language. Hence, is emphasis on education based on classics authors and on the application of scientific discoveries studied from original text, for instance, Kepler. From this standpoint, LaRouche rejected reductionist forms of science and economic doctrines, exposing modern statistical economics and forecasting a long-term collapse of the current global financial system many years, even decades in advance. I have already mentioned Dante Alighieri, but LaRouche was knowledgeable in the work of the greatest humanists, scientists, and artists of all nations. As concerns Italy, which he was very familiar with and visited often, he had a unique insight in Renaissance giants such as Filippo Brunelleschi and Leonardo da Vinci. Of Brunelleschi, LaRouche always stressed the revolutionary method introduced in architecture with the use of nonlinear geometry such as catenary curve, based on the least action principle in the construction of the famous cupola of Santa Maria del Fiore in Florence. The work of Brunelleschi in science architecture and of Verdi in music art were for LaRouche a reference for rebuilding the moral capacity to survive of the Italian population. LaRouche drafted several specific economic proposals for Italy, starting with a goalist solution for the Italian monetary crisis back in 1976. The basic principles of that proposal are still valid today, even if circumstances have changed to the worst. In 21, during one of his 20,000 or one. During one of his visits to Italy, LaRouche was asked about the European single currency, which had just been introduced. It is like a magnificent road, he said, punctuated by the corpse of nations along the way. He answered to the stunned interlocutors, in light of the failure of the EMU, his forecast is unfortunately proving to be correct once again. Thus, throughout the LaRouche solution, one can oppose plans by globalist multinationals and financial powers without drifting into nationalism and conflicts. On the contrary, the healthy exchange among sovereigns who respect each other lays the basis for international agreements on major issues such as energy, international and intercontinental infrastructures, scientific and technological research. Thus, combining the democratic strength of nations with the patriotic sentiments, respect for other nations, and responsible growth, as well as expressing the potential of each country, peace becomes not just a finality in itself, but above all a tool of international relations based on mutual respect and adequate development for everyone. It is the win-win model which has started to prevail on the obsolete Mors tua vita mea paradigm and has comforted the last period of Lyndon LaRouche earthly life.
Thank you very much. And before we move on to the next presentation by Hussein Askary, we would like to present you a short video from a hotspot, a crisis point of this world, Yemen. And this video was recorded by a friend of LaRouche's. His name is Fuad Al-Ghafari. He is the chair of the BRICS Development Network. Please roll the video.
الأصدقاء بل الأشقاء في معهد شيلر العالمي، شكرا لدعوتي أنا فؤاد الغفاري من صنعاء للمشاركة في مناسبتكم يوم 16 نوفمبر 2019 في لقاء تكريمي للراحل الكبير ليندون لاروش. لقد كنتم معنا في نشر أول بيان ضد العدوان الغاشم في 26 مارس 2015 الذي قلنا فيه أن العدوان يهدد بريكس اليمن، وكنتم معنا في نقل كلمة فخامة الأخ الرئيس صالح الصماط من منصة السبعين يوم 21 سبتمبر 2017 وهو يحيي دول بريكس. وكم تلقينا دعوات منكم للسفر، لكن إغلاق مطار صنعاء الدولي يحول دائما دون سفرنا، وهو اليوم مغلق للعام الرابع، وليس سفرنا أهم من سفر المرضى الذين مات منهم الألوف، وتقف الآن 300,000 حالة مرضية في انتظار السفر. ورغم ما تعانيه صنعاء فقد رفعت في 26 مارس 2018 شعار يد تحمي ويد تبني يوم دعا لذلك الرئيس صالح الصماط. ورغم ما تعانيه صنعاء فهي تشهد حالة أمن رسمية وشعبية منقطعة النظير، يمكن أن تكون هي الأمان الأول لسندات الائتمان وينابيع الثقة العابرة للحدود. ومن صنعاء قدمنا في حكومة شباب بريكس وشبكة بريكس للتنمية اليمنية بالشراكة مع معهد شيلر العالمي رؤية المعجزة الاقتصادية السعيدة لبناء اليمن وإعادة إعماره واقترانه بطريق الحرير الجديد والجسر البري الأوراسيوي الجديد. وللراحل ليندون لاروش صورة هامة داخل هذا التقرير، واليوم أصبحت مفاتيح لاروش لتقدم دول بريكس تدرس في مدارس أساسية وجامعات عليا عبر محبي لاروش في صنعاء. وقد جاء ذكر التنسيق مع مجموعة البريكس في الرؤية الوطنية 2030 لبناء الدولة اليمنية الحديثة، بما يعكس النيات العظيمة للجهود التي بذلها معالي الأخ المهندس هشام شرف وزير الخارجية، والأخ الشيخ الدكتور صالح صايل رئيس اللجنة السياسية والعلاقات الدولية والمغتربين في مجلس الشورى، والأخ المهندس خالد شرف الدين نائب رئيس الهيئة العامة للاستثمار. ولقاءنا بالأخ الأستاذ محمد صالح النعيمي عضو المجلس السياسي الأعلى في مطلع سبتمبر 2019. وقد عبر الأخ الأستاذ محمد عبد السلام رئيس الوفد اليمني لمشاورات السلام يوم الأربعاء 16 أكتوبر 2019 بسعادة السيد كانغ يونغ السفير الصيني لدى بلادنا عن حضور بلادنا التاريخي والاستراتيجي على طول مبادرة طريق الحرير الجديد برا وبحرا، وهو ما جاء محققا لقول السيدة هيلغا لاروش رئيسة معهد شيلر العالمي في 25 يونيو 2016 أن اليمن لؤلؤة في عقد طريق الحرير الجديد. هذا الحديث إليكم ليس شعرا، بل روح تحدي، روح تفاؤل، روح حرة تريد أن تعتمد على عملتها، كما دعا لذلك الراحل الكبير ليندون لاروش طيلة 60 عاما في حياته السابقة من أجل عملة مستقلة لكل دولة، ولتجتمع على أثرها جميع الدول في سلة عملات في نظام بريتون وودز جديد لمشاريع بنية تحتية نحو الجسر البري العالمي. فتحية في مقامكم لروح السيد ليندون لاروش الذي إن غاب عنا فقد التصق بمن قرأ فكره، والذي إن رحل بشخصه فقد ترك فريقا عظيما بعده، والذي إن فقدنا قوله سابقا إن هذا أعظم حدث في العالم لهذا اليوم، فإننا نعرف اليوم بعد مماته كثيرا من الأحداث العالمية التي تنطق عن نفسها لتقول لاروش مر من هنا.
Now, Mr. Askary, the floor is yours to speak about the importance of Mr. LaRouche for the Arab nations.
Thank you very much, Stefan. Ladies and gentlemen, Mrs. Helga LaRouche, it's a great honor for me to be speaking in this conference. Lyndon LaRouche and Helga LaRouche have a special place in the hearts and minds of people in Yemen. As you heard our friend Fuad, he could not come to this conference and previous conferences because of the Saudis bombing the airport, forcing it to be shut down. And thousands of people have died because they cannot go travel abroad for treatment. This is what he was saying. But in spite of all this suffering, we have people in Yemen, especially young people and school children, studying the ideas of Lyndon LaRouche. And this is our last physical meeting with Lynn. It was in this place last year. And this picture, we have, this was a message to the children in a school in Yemen who sent us these things as a greeting to Lynn and Helga. And in that school, is there a pointer here? The top, huh? Oh, sorry. Anyway, they are studying, as part of their school program, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals 2030, which are in the color ones, 17 goals. But some of the parents and the teachers insisted to superimpose on it, on the top of that, LaRouche's, what they call LaRouche's 5 metrics of progress. Because without these, they say, we would not be able to fulfill the goals of development. So this is a fascinating thing which is going on in Yemen, right in the middle of the worst humanitarian crisis in the world. So the Prophet of Islam, Muhammad, whose birthday was celebrated last week across the Muslim world, says, when the son of Adam, that's a figurative for human beings, both male and female, when the son of Adam dies, his or her actions in and upon this world cease, except for 3. When you die, your connection to the physical world discontinued, except for 3 connections. A flowing charity, a continued charity, like a school, a mosque you build, you help poor people, and you make sure there's financing after you die. 2, a useful knowledge or science. Or 3, a good posterity who pray for him or her, who continue his existence physically. Lyndon LaRouche's soul enjoys all these 3 ties to this material world and to immortality. How? First, through his international organization, charity, which is helping people around the world to create a better future. So this is one thing. Second, through his scientific, economic, and philosophical ideas that have given the world a new Silk Road that is evolving right now into a world land bridge and revolutionizing the world economy. And we heard the fantastic description of that knowledge, which is continued by the LaRouche Youth Movement in yesterday's presentations. And third, through all the young people in many countries around the world whom Lyndon LaRouche adopted as his own children, making them his posterity who are now thinking about him and praying for him. It's not the kind of prayer you have in church, it's like what we saw yesterday. I have worked with Lyndon LaRouche since 1995. My first meeting with him was in that year as I attended the first conference of the Schiller Institute here in Germany. It was the most shocking encounter for a young Arab Muslim man. In one of the breaks at the conference, Paul Rasmussen, one of our members in Denmark, he's not here for health reasons, we wish him the best of health. He literally pulled me from my hand and took me to Lyndon, and he said, here's Hussein, he's from Iraq, he knows a lot about Islamic philosophy, which was not true. Anyway, Lynn lit up. Lynn always likes to meet new young people, and we started talking. But then suddenly Lynn said, Islam is a synthetic religion. So it's not original. And then in his typical manner, he came closer to me and said, you know, his famous pause with his famous finger, and God does not speak Arabic. I said, what? So we had another Muslim guy with us from Eritrea. So I was looking to see if I need some backing here. Is this what this old man saying true? And the guy had disappeared. He left us. And I never seen him again. So maybe he thought that God would send a thunderbolt through the roof of the building and hit LaRouche and everybody around him for saying these kind of blasphemies. But that did not happen, of course. God is not Zeus. He does not have thunderbolts to shoot at people because, as we know, God is truth, justice, and mercy. Now, did Lyndon LaRouche say that he knew more about Islam than me or anybody else? No, he did not say that. He never claimed that. He was using his rational mind, and obviously the lessons he has learned in dealing with Christian fundamentalists. Concerning the first point, that Islam is a synthetic religion, it's not difficult to prove. It's correct. Lynn was right. Because Prophet Muhammad himself never claimed that he had come with something new or original. He said, I am continuing the work of Abraham, Moses, Jesus the Christ, and all the saints. Islam was a synthesis of all the previous monotheistic religions, and that's not a bad thing. Concerning the second point, that God doesn't speak Arabic, that was a tough one. So I had to go and do my homework, studying a lot of Islamic philosophy. I discovered then that the question of the Quran not being the word of God, the literal word of God, was a hotly disputed issue, actually, during the Islamic Renaissance by Muslim scholars and philosophers in the 8th and 9th and 10th and 11th century, especially by Ibn Sina, the philosopher. I read a lot of Ibn Sina, and he agreed with this viewpoint, because God does not talk to our ears with words, but God talks to us through our creative minds. And revelation, which is in Arabic, al-wahi, means inspiration, is the attempt, according to Ibn Sina, the attempt by the human creative philosophical mind to reach out to the stars in heaven and grasp and bring back the divine knowledge, not receiving it passively through archangel Gabriel, as the priests have told us. So this is Lynn's method. I mean, he is sometimes very irritating for people, like Socrates was irritating for people because he doesn't accept axioms and beliefs at face value. You have to prove. So all my subsequent work with LaRouche and all my personal work, whether in writing or organizing other people, was based on this scientific method of figuring out of what you believe in is true or not. Can it be proven? So Lynn's ability to forecast strategic and economic developments was based on this and a profound understanding of both the human nature and historical developments. The man knew a lot about history. The other important thing we learned from Lynn is how do you intervene to change things, not only describing things. If you rely on previous experiences or the current situation, the world looks hopeless. You need to bring something back from the future to be able to determine what direction you or your nation needs to move. It is the future, or our vision of the future, which should determine our actions today. So the whole time, his and our mind is in the future, looking at the present and the past. And therefore, my continued relationship to Lyndon is situated in the future. Everything I do now is part of his future. In this sense, he is in the simultaneity of eternity. Everything we do with his ideas is an extension of his life into the future, into immortality. We have been through many great moments and terrible crises in the past 24 years. I've been working in the LaRouche movement and the Schiller Institute. LaRouche warned, for example, that the Israeli-Palestinian peace process would collapse if economic development on a large scale was not prioritized. But the worst of these crises, from my standpoint, personally, is the invasion and destruction of my home country, Iraq, by the combination of the US and British forces. While we stood against the invasion before it happened, we continued to propose solutions after the fact. We never gave up on the Iraqi people. And the LaRouche Doctrine in 2004, which was formulated by Lynn, but also in an interview I conducted with him for the Executive Intelligence Review magazine in that year, it was an attempt to make the best of the situation after the invasion of Iraq in 2003 and not let things slide into total disaster. Unfortunately, the worst disaster came in 2006 when Vice President Dick Cheney declared the coming sectarian conflict. He actually announced it, that this is what's coming. Then came the invasion of Libya in 2011, and right after that, the attack on Syria. But even at the darkest moments of that situation, we proposed Operation Phoenix. Operation Phoenix. Phoenix is the mythical bird which will rise from the ashes as Syria is rising from the ashes today. That's what we called it. But in 2014, Syria was on the verge of total destruction, and my friend Ulf Sandmark, please, he took a personal risk traveling to Syria twice to present LaRouche's and our organization's ideas. Here he's in the top picture meeting with Dr. Buthaina Sha'ban. She's the chief advisor of President Bashar al-Assad. And below is the Prime Minister of Syria holding a copy of the Arabic translation of the Silk Road Becomes the World Land Bridge. And many ministers in Syria have this as an interesting reading. I know that from third sources. So Ulf was in Syria at the heat of that crisis, and now the Syrian government, of course, is not saying that what we are going to do is what is in these proposals, but it's in the same direction, that joining the Silk Road, rebuilding the infrastructure, and investing in industrial and agricultural production. Last year, I helped draw the Yemen reconstruction plan, Operation Felix. Felix is derived from the term Arabia Felix. which is the Greek or the Roman name for Yemen, the happy Arabia, because it was so prosperous at the time. So therefore, we want to inspire the Yemenis that even in the moment of darkness, they should think about and rebuild the happy Yemen. It's now adopted by the Yemeni General Investment Authority. It's a hot topic of debate among many different parties, both the ones in the different parties fighting against each other. Even the Saudi-backed government people are studying our reconstruction plan. So while everybody was only talking about how the Yemeni crisis is the worst humanitarian catastrophe on the planet, which is true, a crime against humanity, and I and my friends focus on planning the road to peace. Because without a vision of the beautiful future the Yemenis and their children can have, it's difficult to motivate them to sit down at the negotiations table. Now, China is interested in the Yemeni situation. They were very passive. And because also our plan for the reconstruction of Yemen is to building the transport corridors for Yemen, developing agriculture and industry and mining, but also using Yemen's fantastic geographical location on the maritime Silk Road and the Eurasian land bridge to promote that. The Chinese understand this very well, and they're very interested to take part now in the peace process and the peace negotiations in Yemen. So this is advancing very in a good manner, but the war, of course, has to be stopped. The bombing and the blockade on the Yemeni people have to be stopped. Right now, there we have seen, and many people talked about all the young people now making riots, demonstrating, protesting in Iraq, in Lebanon, and other, demanding justice, a decent life, and a future. Maybe we can tell them what to do or send them a 10-page proposal, but I think that's no longer enough. And here comes my most exciting part, the most exciting part of my collaboration with Lyndon LaRouche, which is yet to come. And therefore, I want to make an announcement. From next month, I'm taking the challenge of starting the online LaRouche School for Physical Economics for Arabs. So if you feel... I'm sorry if you feel discriminated, but if you don't speak or read Arabic, you can blame your education system for that. It will be a subscriber service because this has to be financially sustainable. People can subscribe to become members in the school, so they can follow and receive and participate in regular classes, which I will give in Arabic. I will also translate classes from our associates, and we can have exchange with the subscribers and viewers. We focus on young people, but now we also have universities interested in looking at this project, this experiment, and see if that can fit into their curriculum. So this is one thing we also going to work on. We work with individuals, but we also try to attempt to engage universities in Arab countries to use this material, use LaRouche's ideas, and package it as part of their education processes. We will have, I have already translated Lynn's main book, So You Wish to Learn All About Economics. It's available in Arabic. We will also make available for the subscribers to get also this mega book, 400 plus pages on the Silk Road becomes the world land bridge, because the most important part of it is not all the great projects is being built. The most important part of it is the metrics of progress which LaRouche has developed. So this will be also used. Subscribers can have this and the other book for free if they subscribe to the school. There will be a certain fee, a small fee they can pay, so they can read these online for free. But they can also order the books physically, even though they don't subscribe. So this is, we're going to do this for a year, maybe 2 years, and hopefully we will have some interesting results, from this. So I will also be doing regular strategic and economic updates in Arabic, which will be available for free for people on YouTube and other social media. This is one of my speeches in Yemen, explaining the whole concept of the Silk Road and the Belt and Road concept. So, but all that will be based on the work of and thoughts of Lyndon LaRouche, of course, and work which also developed by his associates. As I told a friend about the demonstrations in Iraq and Lebanon against corruption, what will you do next when you take away the corrupt people? Where are the people with the scientific ideas who will build your country? There will be a new void that would be filled by ignorant and corrupt people. That's the risk. Every time you make regime change, you get something worse. Or somebody might come up with the brilliant idea of getting economists from the bankrupt EU or USA to run things, so-called technocrats. It's a very nice word that people use, technocrats. They are educated by the IMF or the World Bank in American universities. And so therefore, we need to educate people. I think this should become a priority, especially young people in the Arab world. As far as I am concerned, I think this should be replicated elsewhere, about physical economics. We can no longer and should no longer try to dictate to other people how they should run their own affairs, but we can inspire them with knowledge and a passion for the good of humankind. And honestly, I think, as I said before, LaRouche's economics should be studied in universities, but that's an issue for debate. In conclusion, I would like to say that we should always show gratitude to those who came before us and dedicated their life to beautiful and great ideas. How do we pay them their dues? As Friedrich Schiller emphasized, every generation receives gifts from the previous generation, and these gifts should be enriched and passed on to the next generation. This way, our having lived acquires a meaning, a lasting meaning, and we can die with a smile on our face, as Lynn always used to say. We have other people who passed away, left us, but I enlist these persons because I work directly with them and have very personal relationship. Their character and their work inspired me a lot, especially when I was young. Gail Billington from the US, Ture Fredin from Sweden, and Doug de Groot, who dedicated his life working on the questions of Africa. Here we were in Sudan, in Khartoum on the Nile River. And Mark Birdman, a fantastic human being whom I work with very closely. And of course we have Lyndon LaRouche. So these people left a deep imprint on me, and I promised them to continue their work and do my best for that. So please tell all your Arab friends and their neighbors and their relatives that we have this school starting next month, and they should join us and educate their children. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Good luck. The next speaker is from the famous city of Florence in Italy. His name is Claudio Giudici. He is the director of a national taxi driver union, Uritaxi. And of course, Helga and Lynn have visited Florence many times, and they admire the city. And so it's very fitting to hear your speech about Lyndon LaRouche, a Florentine mind.
Thank you, and primarily good luck to Hussein for his new school, LaRouche School in Arabic language. It's a very important project. And I would like to do my speech in English language. It could be my first public speech in English language, but for the role that I have in Italy, it's better if I speak in Italian. And easier. Ho conosciuto Lyndon LaRouche durante la crisi finanziaria del 2000, prima della sua famosa previsione del gennaio 2001, quando egli ipotizzò che avremmo dovuto attenderci un nuovo incendio del Reichstag negli Stati Uniti sotto la guida dei neocon. Dunque, quando il successivo 11 settembre le Twin Towers furono abbattute, chi come me conosceva quel suo monito era pronto a comprendere il processo che sarebbe partito da quel momento. Da quel giorno, infatti, partirono una fase di radicale
would have liked to give my speech in English, but it's better to give it in Italian. I met Lyndon LaRouche during the financial crisis of 2000, before his famous forecast of January 2001, when he hypothesized that we could expect a new Reichstag's fire in the United States under the leadership of the neoconservatives. So when the Twin Towers were knocked down the following September 11th, these who, like me, knew that warning were ready to understand the process that started at that moment. From that day, in fact, the process of radical colonization of the Middle East and the process here in the West of a radical brainwashing in the name of a constant terrorism alert started. In 2003, Milan, however, I had the opportunity to meet personally LaRouche. In the same weekend, I was invited to a lunch with Romano Prodi, but I preferred to attend personally, live, a meeting with this revolutionary man. And speaking of revolution, LaRouche, like the real revolutionaries, was radical in ideas, but moderate in methods, although creative thanks to classical culture. And about creativity, we interestingly saw an example of LaRouche's method by a young activist in front of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who by resorting to acting art and paradox, put up a piece that would have been proud of Rabelais, bringing out the madness inherent in anti-human positions such as the Malthusian decarbonization that places man as an enemy of the planet instead of the highest expression of the traditions, philosophies, and teachings that still guide the road of a world in its entirety in the road to progress. Man as the highest stage of the evolutionary and anti-anthropic process of creation. With that, I have already brought up the principles of the LaRouchean philosophy, considering that is the greatest continuator in our century of the Judeo-Christian tradition, of the Platonic tradition through humanism, Kepler, Leibniz, the American system of political economy, and Franklin Roosevelt. As a politician and economist, one might think that talking about LaRouche means talking about these two branches of the human sciences, but one would fall into the error of our time to consider man in utilitarian terms as a specialist in some sector, what is enough for that sector. And maybe, if I'm allowed a joke, that's why they don't work, and so badly have the technical governments done. LaRouche was instead a universal thinker, and for those like me who come from Florence, it is easy to think, to explain that he was to men like Leon Battista Alberti, Leonardo da Vinci, or Lorenzo the Magnificent, as brilliant exponents of the Florentine Renaissance that LaRouche often quoted. As such, the priority that is philosophical, political, and economic vision required as an eternal mission for humanity to invest in this capacity for cognitive, creative reason of every man in order to guarantee the integral development of every man, of the whole man. And it is on this that I would like to dwell, the integral development of man as opposed to sustainable development. In the first case, as Plato teaches, man is a collaborator of God in the development of creation. In the second case, man is almost an accident of nature. not his most advanced product that brings the biosphere to the noblest level of noosphere, but an element to contain, keep at bay, as can be done with an overexcited dog. And it is this latter, in fact, the basic vision that permeates the new doctrine that from the manipulation of an innocent like La Greta Thunberg finds in apparently novel formula in the notion of new humanism, as resumed in Italy by Premier Conte and Pope Francis. The expression was forged by Edgar Morin, but is nothing but a Sarpian version of giving man some development, a bit of science and technology, but not overdo it. And then here is what LaRouche, whose rehabilitation is demanded by his political movement, can potentially break the games that the elites were preparing. There is a cultural and scientific pessimism that dominates the current cultural model, and if we look at the short cycle of history, especially in the West, there is nothing to be happy about. But if we look at the long cycle, then we must be optimistic and consider how much the human species has grown in terms of civilization, morality, economic, democratic, and social potential. And if we want to get out of this short history cycle, we have to tap into the great periods that brought us out of the Dark Ages. And then we have to look at the Florentine Renaissance that on its rediscovery of Platonism found its cornerstone. And at the second post-war period, it found its moral impetus on Christianity. Both these periods were periods of reconstruction. And how did they rebuild? Starting right from the primus that LaRouche has placed as a pillar of his political and economic vision, the Imago Viva Dei, that is an anthropocentrism connected to those principles, universal physical principles that are the expression of pre-existing principle of truth of God. And so man is not the enemy of this time. The serial polluter that today the dominant cultural complex describes us, but its solution if he operates in respect of those laws of truth. And since these are not just nice words, then we need to invest in man, in every man, in the whole man. This is why it is essential that we move from the financial paradigm of mind to the new paradigm of the physical economy. This was the vision of great humanists such as Thomas More or Leibniz, who advocated a society of arts and science. And to find a way against, LaRouche also told us how to do it in political amour. What the US did under Franklin Roosevelt, but also what Europe did in the post-war. And to find that way, LaRouche told us how to do in political economy, to move from monetary system to credit system that will pay for themselves thanks to the constant technological scientific progress of the physical economy. A last reflection, I believe that we have to be optimistic if we think that without being in the institutions, the Schiller Institute, the LaRouche's movement, are influencing the world politics. And we think tomorrow when we will be in the institutions. Thank you.
So let's listen to the video message by Jack Stockwell.
Guten Tag. Here and there, now and then, God makes a giant among men. My name is Jack Stockwell, and it was my special privilege to know of and to know personally Lyndon LaRouche in the late 1990s. I have stood before him in conferences. I have interviewed him over the radio several times, sat with him and Helga at dinner more than once, and can honestly say I do not need even the finger of one hand to count a more commanding and imposing character in my life. My first response to Lynn in my first radio interview with him nearly more than 20 years ago was to find the nearest Oxford dictionary. In all my radio experience, I had never interviewed someone where I felt so compelled to not miss a word that fell from his mouth. I have never heard such a concise, clear, and conclusive understanding of not just world events, but world history. As he gave me the tools to cut through the morass, the disinformation, the outright lies of modern media. He gave me a roadmap, a thread to follow in understanding the great dichotomy between the lowest evils and the greatest virtues of mankind. To me, it simply boiled down to a basic understanding of economics and the source of credit and the intent of one man upon another. As many of you know, I had asked Lynn to be a guest once again on my show on September 11th, 2001. And we started the show as usual with me trying desperately to sound his equal, and Lynn once again making the complicated seem so simple. I did not have a television in the studio, but several lines started lighting up as one call after another shouted, "Turn on the TV, turn on the TV." And I told Lynn to hold on while I went to an internet news feed, and there in front of me, the Twin Towers were under attack. I fell back in my chair, just stunned beyond expression, as I tried to force the words to Lynn as to what I was seeing. And he simply reacted with what seemed to me to be his basic understanding of everything as business as usual, only this time, unfortunately, it's on our own soil. And then he said something stunning to me right after that. He said, they're going to blame this, within minutes of knowing what happened, he said, they're going to blame this on bin Laden. And words to that, without any evidence, they're going to blame it on bin Laden. And words to the effect that this will be the excuse for an invasive war in the Middle East. And it will be all over the control of the oil. And one more thing he said about that, he said Middle Eastern terrorists would not have the capability of carrying this off all by themselves. They had to have inside help. And much of this has been proven true to my satisfaction. Now, what I've said speaks to my history with Lynn, but what about now? Is that influence to summon up greatness that he instilled still there? Was he just a passing fascination of mine that dwindles as time passes? No, not at all. In giving me and my listeners something higher to reach for than some knee-jerk conclusion or options thrown about by every wind of doctrine, my worldview now focuses on the best among us, the higher expressions of mankind in art and music and social relations. He's given me a world paradigm that reaches beyond this world, beyond the moon, beyond Mars, beyond imagination. His concepts of the American system of credit, of just the preamble to the US Constitution, were regular topics on my show. And I felt by the time I left that daily program, I had received a college-level education of the motive forces behind world events, and even more, the solution to the meaning of what it means to be human. In some anthologies yet to be written regarding the American political, social, and financial history, a name is going to figure prominently among those volumes yet to be written. A name most unfairly attacked, suppressed, or otherwise defamed, as that voice exposed the criminality, the usury, the outright fraud behind the current systems of government and finance. His was an understanding that all Americans and those that love freedom ought to bring into their lives quickly while there is yet light to see. Whenever I hear the name LaRouche, I pause for a moment and silently express gratitude for two things. One, he raised my understanding and increased my awareness of the world and of the potential of mankind to a higher level than I had ever expected or imagined before. And number two, he was my friend. Thank you, everyone, for letting me share a rare moment of appreciation for a true giant among men.
And now it's my pleasure to announce Mr. Harley Schlanger, who functioned many years as the spokesperson, spokesman for Lyndon LaRouche in the United States. He's a board member of the Schiller Institute. He's going to tell us more about Lynn's philosophical outlook in his speech, "Where is America Headed? The LaRouchian Solution is the Way Out of Chaos." Thank you.
Thank you, Helga, Schiller Institute members and friends. To address the question of where is America headed, a good place to begin is to look at what Roger Stone said when asked to comment on the death of Lyndon LaRouche. Stone was a longtime friend of President Donald Trump, and he was just convicted as the last of the defendants of the fraudulent Russiagate prosecutions of the legal hitman Robert Mueller. He was targeted largely due to his role as the key strategist in the Trump campaign. Stone first encountered LaRouche in New Hampshire in the 1980s, or 1980, when he was the coordinator in New England for Ronald Reagan's presidential campaign. Asked about his relationship to LaRouche, Stone said he was, quote, very familiar with the extraordinary and prophetic thinking of LaRouche, unquote. And he added that LaRouche's ideas had a, quote, important backstage role, unquote, in electing Donald Trump. Many who followed LaRouche over the years initially expressed surprise that he and his movement have defended Trump since his election against the regime change coup run by British intelligence in league with the Obama intelligence team to remove him. Trump's public persona, as portrayed by hostile media as a crude, ignorant, ego-driven bully, seems light years away from that of the thought-provoking philosophical approach of LaRouche. Though it must be said, LaRouche could counterpunch as hard or harder than Donald Trump. He just didn't use Twitter. Yet it should be noted that the ongoing attempted coup is being run by the same network and some of the very same people, including Robert Mueller, who ran the railroad which put Lyndon LaRouche in prison in 1989. In talking about Trump's victory in a February 2017 interview, Lyndon identified the reason for his support. Speaking of Trump's campaign promise to return to the American system of economics, he said this has the potential, quote, to build up the possibility of a revival of the US economy, unquote. The vote for him, LaRouche continued, quote, is one of the many expressions of populations being fed up with being victims of globalization, which has made the poor poorer and destroyed the middle class. Trump gave expression to that sentiment, Lynn said. For the US to survive in the turbulent period ahead, in which populations around the world are rising up and traditional parties are disintegrating, as here in Germany, for example, in the face of the implosion of the neoliberal economic and financial system, it is urgent that Trump return to that promise to revive the American system and implement it as a policy of his administration. Which means that the real history of the uniqueness which has defined America in its best moments, which is most clearly reflected in the life's works of one of its greatest thinkers and statesmen, Lyndon LaRouche, must become known to a growing number of its citizens. And that is the long history of the battle between a classical Republican humanist conception of man against an imperial oligarchic view centered in the city of London. LaRouche often remarked that his unrivaled record as a forecaster stemmed from his rejection of the axioms of neoliberalism and his refusal to accept the tyranny of popular opinion. Let me just interject here a personal example of my experience with Lynn's unparalleled ability to forecast. On the eve of the 2000 election, between the green lunatic Al Gore and the future war criminal George W. Bush, Lynn was asked at a youth cadre school what he thought would be the result of next Tuesday's election. Without a moment's hesitation, he said, "We won't know right away. In fact, we might not have the result for weeks or months." That was it. The room reacted with a stunned silence. Later, after he got off the phone, I was asked as his spokesman what he meant. I stumbled around for an answer. I thought I should have some answer, but I was forced to admit I have no idea. Remarkably, it turned out he was right. And when I asked him later how he knew that, he said, it was obvious. In his economic forecasting, he always started from the top down. Forget statistics, systems analysis, the algorithms of the quants, he said. You must begin by recognizing that neoliberalism is a disease, not an economic theory, which has its modern origins in imperial Venice. While continuing the overall outlook of the bestial Roman Empire, the Venetians were confronted by a new enemy, with the emergence of the modern nation state, a product of the Golden Renaissance, a movement which united the scientific philosophical conceptions of man developed by Cardinal Nicholas of Cusa with the scientific artistic brilliance of Leonardo da Vinci. The political form of the nation state, which emerged from this unity, LaRouche said, is the idea that government, and this is a quote, must be morally accountable to be the instrument of promoting the general welfare of all the people and their posterity, their cultural development, their welfare, and the improvement of the land, unquote. This concept became the bedrock of the idea of national economic sovereignty and provided the basis for the advances in statecraft associated with King Louis XI of France in the middle of the 15th century and Henry VII of England at the end of the century. It is this tradition 3 centuries later which informed the founding fathers of the United States and is embedded in its founding documents, the Declaration of Independence and the US Constitution. The Venetians immediately recognized the threat these developing sovereign nations posed to their imperial system, which was based on slave labor and free trade. As it became impossible to run a global empire from Venice, the Venetian system moved north and was revived as Anglo-Dutch liberalism, consolidated by its takeover of England in 1688. The British East India Company, after 1763, became the economic base of that empire, which soon was consolidated as a global empire. One of the chief spokesmen for this empire was John Locke, who is often falsely identified as the leading philosophical influence on America's founding fathers. Shamefully, this is now taught as gospel in American universities and accepted by most economists and political scientists. In fact, Locke was a leading apologist for the empire. He was an investor in the Royal Africa Company, which was at the center of the slave trade. His Fundamental Constitutions of Carolina, written while serving as secretary to arch-imperialist Earl Shaftesbury, is a defense of government by a feudal aristocracy. He was instrumental in the establishment of the Bank of England in 1694, which in its official history states that it was founded as a private bank to act as banker to the government, which meant to the monarchy. In 1696, Locke was appointed by the king to the Board of Trade, which was the original enforcer of British free trade dogma, epitomized today by the enforcement arms of private financial institutions, such as the International Monetary Fund, the Bank for International Settlements, and the World Trade Organization. In reviewing this history in a webcast on October 12, 2005, titled Truth in Economic Forecasting, LaRouche exposed the difference between the Lockean system, which is still the British system today, and the American system. It has to do with the control of money by private interests and the subordination of physical economy to monetary interests. That's the key distinction, he said. Under the British system, value is measured arbitrarily by monetary terms, which are subject to manipulation, as we see in looking at the post-1971 end of the Bretton Woods system, to the run-up of the crash of 2008, and again today, when unsustainable debt is protected at face value on the books of banks and financial institutions, protected by unlimited monetary expansion through such fraudulent bailout policies as quantitative easing, negative interest rates, and overnight funds injected into the so-called repo markets. In that webcast, LaRouche said that in contrast, in a republic, quote, the performance of money is measured by physical economy. How do we run a money system to promote trade and investment, to increase productivity, so as to increase the opportunity for development, LaRouche said. He came back to this theme, I should say, many, many, many times, in many speeches and in many writings. But in a speech in Berlin on March 2nd, 2006, The Urgency of the American System Today, he again elaborated what he meant. He said that governments based on monetary systems, as in the US at present, remember this is 2006, and Europe under the European Union, whether supposedly leftist Keynesian or neoliberal Friedmanite, are those in which, quote, the government is subordinate of a central bank. The central bank is largely a creature controlled by private financial interest. Unless the government is very powerful and has a lot of support, they, the private financial interests, control the government, unquote. He added that the British system today combines the private control over monetary policy with so-called globalization, which dominates the policies of governments in the transatlantic region. Here's a further quote from that same webcast. He said, that means we're going to have to go to a Eurasian orientation for Europe in terms of economy. We must not have globalization. Globalization is death. It's a form of imperialism under which no one has any sovereignty over anything. And groups of bankers, like the Lazard Group in France, run the world and eat the world and eat the people in it. So therefore, he concluded, it has to be sovereign nation states. Let those words sink in for a minute. It has to be sovereign nation states. Only in a nation whose real history has been deliberately distorted and lied about, such as is going on in the United States today, to the point that its leading politicians would embrace John Locke as a mentor of our founding fathers, could the idea of national economic sovereignty be denounced as a racist doctrine? Yet that is precisely what those attacking President Trump charge. In their imbecilic rants against Trump, what they are really attacking is the concept of America, which has been championed by LaRouche, who said in this October 2005 webcast, the United States is the only nation, the only national system which, with the American system of political economy, has ever successfully challenged the British system, unquote. The future of the United States depends on understanding, on the most profound level, what those words mean, so we may choose the LaRouchian solution today to win the battle against the British Empire, run by its private financial controllers in the City of London and Wall Street through central banks. That President Trump has recently described these forces in terms used by President Eisenhower as the military-industrial complex, in speaking of why he made the decision to break with the 2 decades-long policy of U.S. involvement in unending wars, is a step in the right direction, but does not go far enough. President Trump should ponder, along with all of us, the implications of the following statement by LaRouche from a webcast on November 11th, 2009, given after it had become clear that the incoming Obama administration would continue with the same failed and disastrous policies of the Bush administration, which led to the crash of 2008. I believe this clear conception from Lynn for the future is what Roger Stone had in mind when he said that LaRouche provided the important backstage role in Trump's election victory. So let's see the video, please.
What I've been involved in recently has been the development of a solution. The solution, and it's the only shot you've got, is a 4-power agreement, prospectively, among the United States, with a change in the current administration's policy, Russia, China, India, and some smaller countries which would be willing to participate in this. This would represent a governments of the world which account for about half or more of the population of the world. So that if an initiative is made, this includes the United States, Russia, China, India, and other countries. If an alliance of these 4 and other countries occurs, that is sufficient power to bring down the present world system and at the same time institute a new one. However, If we have the guts to put the system through bankruptcy reorganization, this nation can survive. It will survive on the condition that we make an alliance to break the power of the British Empire and the British interests internationally. That means making a partnership with Russia, China, India, and other countries to eliminate the present world monetary system. Eliminate the present monetary system and go to a credit system, which is the system adopted by the United States before our Constitution was actually formed, under Alexander Hamilton, in dealing with the war debt of the United States in the early 1780s, and then became an integral part in the foundation of our federal Constitution at a later point. So if we go back to our constitutional standard of a credit system and join with Russia, China, India, and other countries in also getting a block of a credit system, we have the power then, with the support of other nations who are looking for a solution, to eliminate the imperial system, which runs the monetary system, which runs the planet today. That's our only chance. If we don't have the guts to do that, we have nobody to us but ourselves to blame for not doing it. And that's where we stand.
Today, the future of America depends on participating in that four-power agreement conceived by LaRouche, in cooperation with the Belt and Road Initiative and in implementing the 4 economic laws of Lyndon LaRouche. It is time that the U.S., as a nation, returns fully to its anti-imperial roots and goes with the LaRouche solution. Thank you.
Thank you. Dear friends, may I have your unreserved attention, because I would like to call Ms. Helga Zepp-LaRouche to this podium, and she will address you with a very important and urgent appeal. So let's hear what she has to say.
As you probably realized, if not earlier, over the last 2 days, that there is no bigger difference between the slanders against Lyndon LaRouche and who he really was and is. As a matter of fact, there is not one slander in the world which I cannot think of which has not been named against him. Everything from KGB, CIA, Vatican agent, anti-Semitic, racist, youth cult. Now, when Lynn became older than 90, they stopped saying that because it became sort of obvious that this was not the case. But if you look on the other side, you know, Wilhelm von Humboldt, when he talked about Schiller after he had passed away, he commented on the effect Schiller had in terms of not only his writings, but also of the many, many personal discussions and touching on people's life. And he said the real significance of Schiller was that totality. It was not just the writings, it was how many people he evoked and transformed through the personal contact with him. And, you know, I have been a lot with Lynn in the last, better part of 46 years. And we traveled to Peru, to Brazil, to Mexico, to Sudan, to, I think it was altogether about 40 countries, many of them many times, like Italy, many states in the United States, the presidential campaigns. We normally would almost go to all 50 states. And in the course of this, Lynn met so many human beings. And, if you look at some of the older videos, you see halls full of young people listening to him, absolutely mesmerized to the words of this great man. So I think that given the fact that, we are up against a real big enemy, the mass media, who have decided to, declare him persona non grata. And when we had the great tribunal in '95, where Theo Mitchell was present, and also, I think, Josef Miklosko, at least he was in that period there, this commission was conducted because it was realized that the prosecution of hundreds of elected officials of the United States, state legislators, especially black people or Afro-American people, that they decided that the LaRouche case was exactly like that. And they declared him an honorary Frühmenschen, something which Lynn took with absolute pride and, said that that is exactly what he takes as his Medal of Honor. So what I'm asking you is, if you, out of these proceedings of this conference, agree that it is a question of absolute historic necessity that the name of Lyndon LaRouche gets cleared, I would ask you to support by acclamation in this conference the fact that we will formulate a resolution, an appeal to President Trump to immediately grant pardon or exoneration to Lynn, because, it is not that it's really needed, because Lynn's work will stand for itself. But as I said at this commission in '95, the crime which was committed by the same forces, who are now making the coup against President Trump, who covered up 9/11, who prosecuted him, these are all the same forces. The crime these people committed was not just that my husband went innocently to jail, and many of his colleagues, one of them is sitting here on the podium, Dennis Small. The crime was that by slandering him and prosecuting him in this way, they prevented many people in the United States and around the world of having an unprejudiced access to the great ideas of my husband. And I'm absolutely convinced, and I say this, you may agree with me or not, but I think Lynn was the greatest individual of his time. We have met many great people. We met with Indira Gandhi, we met about 40 heads of state, and many other exceptional individuals of many, many countries. But Lynn was a towering giant. And I personally, I'm absolutely convinced that it is a historical necessity that his name gets cleared so that many young generations to come and those living right now have unrestrained access to his ideas, because for our own humanity, this is absolutely necessary. So I'm asking you to help to send this resolution, but also become active with the Schiller Institute, because we need many, many people who help us to realize the beautiful dream of Lyndon LaRouche. So can I ask you for your confirmation to send this to President Trump? Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you to all of the beautiful speeches and messages that we got in. With your permission, we still have a little bit of time for some urgent questions. Let's take it until 1:15 and then go into lunch break. So if there are questions, I think, do we have a microphone? Microphone is in the middle aisle. So please line up and ask your questions to the speakers.
Merci. Donc je m'appelle Yannick, je suis membre de Solidarité et Progrès en France et je fais partie.
I'm a member of Solidarité et Progrès of France, the party of Jacques Cheminade, and I'm working with the Yellow Vest in France. My question is about national credit and what Lynn has always developed about the development, the difference between credit and money. But I wanted to say something before. This weekend is the birthday of the Yellow Vest in France, because it starts the 17th of November last year. Thousands of people have been mobilized yesterday in the demonstration. Last year we were 1 million in the street, so it's a little bit less now. And in the country of the right of man, people have been slaughtered and have been wounded by the police. And inside of the movement of the Yellow Vest and with Solidarité et Progrès, and I have been intervening, I'm proud to have participated to that, is that with the Yellow Vest we went to Chamalières near Clermont-Ferrand in the south of France last year, in front of the printing machine of the Banque de France, which is printing the colonial money which we call franc CFA, because France is controlling the money of 14 countries. Sébastien Périmoni, who is right now translating, explain the role played by Josef Premier about the monetary slavery. And we have a big banner, Euro, CFA, same fight. We have made a Facebook Live of this event. And our friends of Africa put that on YouTube. And we had more than 3 million views on this intervention against the monetary slavery. And most of the French people didn't know about this monetary slavery imposed by France of 14 countries in Africa. What? France neither don't control his money. What is that? So Euro, CFA was the same fight. It was very funny. And before I came here, it was last Friday, I was in front of the Banque de France in Paris with a 30 Yellow Vest with a big banner, Death to Debt. And we have made also a live Facebook, and we have already 14,000 views in 2 days discussing credit, Glass-Steagall Act, that the debt is controlled between 1945 and 1943 have doubled, but since 1983, that the Banque Nationale is no more Banque Nationale, the debt have been multiplied by 12, not by 2 as the previous period. So we have the monetary slavery. So that's a fight. I'm proud to participate in this fight. So I come to the question. Lynn always emphasizes this difference between money and credit. Money is the past, credit is future. So see, from the point of view of a poor country, if the monetary creation can invest to go to a economical platform to another one, superior one, the limit is no more the money that they have, but the only limit for a poor country, the capacity of the workers to develop this new technology and infrastructure for their development. It is the only limit that the poor country have. Thank you for your answer.
Ok, je suis Eugène André. Ah, j'attends, d'accord.
I prefer to stand. That's okay. The difference between money and credit is that money belongs to Satan. There's a fundamental difference here. A country does not develop by issuing money in any form whatsoever. A country develops by starting from the concept of human creativity. The only thing that actually has value in a physical economy, in a human economy, to be distinguished from an economy of whales or ants or bears or anything else, in a human economy, the only thing that actually has value is creativity per se. This is the essence of Lyndon's discovery as he discussed it. And if you start in an economy, whether it's a poor economy or rich economy, from that concept of man, from that concept of what actually is the motor force of an economy, then everything else falls in place. The experience I've had in especially organizing around Lyndon's ideas in Ibero-America, probably very similar to the experience Hussein has had in Arab countries and other organizers here have had in many parts of the world, is people have an extraordinary difficulty of getting out of their mind this idea of money, that value somehow is represented by money. And once you think like that, Satan has a hold of you, because you have avoided the actual central issue, which is what makes an economy function. If you start from the idea of establishing some sort of a system which will make it possible for human creativity to actually grow, and that means advances in technology and so on and so forth, then that credit system that you establish in that form, from that standpoint, can achieve that. If you start from the other way around, if you start from the standpoint of money, you are actually trying to place a value on something in a fixed term, which of course, as you were just indicating, is based on the past. So it's absolutely critical, in my view, that in our discussions of economy, we completely rid ourselves of any discussion of the monetary or financial side, except to point out how sick it is. But that's always the way Lynn went at this thing. And I think that's absolutely fundamental in our discussion. So don't look for technical things and don't try to explain this in terms of technical issues with people. The point is you have to start from a completely different standpoint of what the human being actually is. If you can do that, and if you can get a person to agree and understand on that basis, the rest falls in place. If you try to go at it the other way around, you've lost, no matter where you go technically with a discussion.
Je voulais rapidement compléter la réponse.
I want to shortly complete the answer. I have to thank Yannick for the operations done in Chamalières. Since a long time, the CFA has been contested in Africa, like POMI. There are other intellectuals and economists who have Professor Nicolas Bou. There's an entire network of contestation, and the CFA franc is only the tip of the iceberg, but it's a symbol of post-colonial policies. The currency is a central issue of national sovereignty. What's done today in so-called poor countries is a fake theory. If we start from the idea that money is an instrument of sovereignty of the people, the question arises, how comes that countries are indebted by their own tool? And if you take away the control of the people about the currency, you have a form of slavery which comes. Currency can be only an element of sovereignty. You cannot put people into the debt slavery in this way. If the currency is used for roads, for infrastructure, then there is no real you escape from the debt trap. That's why we're talking about odious debt of dictatorships, of the system has created elites for its own survival, but they have multiplied these with manipulations, including the dollar. In reality, many debts has been paid already, and they are back at unsupportable levels. So we have to go back to the basic of economy.
Parlerò in italiano perché è un difficile quello che voglio esprimere, che snap.
Le concept de LaRouche,
sustainable economics in this planet, and the man is not an accident on this planet, and it's, this concept is connected to going beyond currency. I agree.
question monétaire, c'est très important.
From that moment, we have a path.
Justement, on a un chemin.
We have to modify, change some monetary functions in order to subtract them to the debt. For example, we in Europe have only debt money, currency, debt currency, which is the euro, which is the inherited, the old national currencies indebted. In Italy, we had differences currency. We could have credit currencies. We could have sovereign currency issued by the state, which is not debt currency, is not managed with a double management. Then there is the lira, which became the euro with the European Central Bank. Then there is the private currency, the trust currency. In Italy, we did the economic miracle in the 60s, not with the lira, but with exchange promissory notes. That was the currency of the Italian miracle, which made us the fourth economic power at the end of the 70s. You had to have a lire to pay the interests on the promissory notes. I cannot stay 3 hours to make the lesson on currency and credit, but I say if we want to become a political movement stronger, more developed, we have to understand that in order to arrive to great tasks, great objectives of Lyndon LaRouche, which we share, we have to find the path, the best path. And on this theme, what is currency and what is the path to reach overcoming currency and make a really real economy. I hope that there will be an international confrontation among the militants and the friends of Lyndon LaRouche and the movements which directly or indirectly are connected to the Schiller Institute and etc. And we have to absolutely confront ourselves on this, because here in Italy, I am part of various groups and parties who have the same objectives, but they're all divided. So we continue to, the forces which prevail use money as the currency of the devil, as it was said before. Grazie, per via del tempo abbiamo.
Their questions, please hold them until the afternoon session. So please, sir.
J'ai juste en fait une proposition.
I have a proposition to Mr. Senny, and then the video that have been published of LaRouche, and what say Mrs. LaRouche. Pan-Africanism is not existing yet, it's a dream. We want this dream to become a reality. How? All the presidents who have tried to implement Pan-Africanism have been killed. They are all dead. All the ones who are directing our country today are not talking about Pan-Africanism. So we have to create a new leadership to speak about Pan-Africanism in Africa. When I listen to Mr. LaRouche, he's talking about Russia, China, the land, India, and United States of America. something is missing. I say it already. You need a fifth pillars, and I think it's Africa. Why Africa? 54 countries is like but if we have a unified Africa, we can be as strong as you can. So I accept what Mr. LaRouche says. I agree that we need to have this idea implemented in Africa, and I think Africa is the best place to develop LaRouche's ideas. So, Mr. Senny, you are young. So accept what the Schiller Institute have proposed to develop LaRouche ideas in Africa. Give you a little bit of time to start and to build Pan-Africanism, and then Africa will join Russia, China, India, and USA. It will be happiness for all mankind. Thank you very much.
Guten Tag, mein Name ist Klaus Werner.
My name is Klaus Werner. I want to add, Mr. LaRouche has mentioned that healing of the system through an insolvency, through a bankruptcy, is possible. Since Trump became president, it looks to me like he is trying to dissolve the present structures. He doesn't want wars. Do you think that Trump is trying to dissolve the current system?
Est-ce que vous pensez vraiment que Trump, depuis qu'il est arrivé à la présidentielle, essaye de toucher à ces structures financières, parce que M. LaRouche a dit qu'il fallait mettre le système en réorganisation de banqueroute? Est-ce que vous pensez que Trump est capable d'aller vers cette réorganisation du système économique? C'est le problème que j'ai adressé. Je veux dire, dans sa campagne, il a mentionné clairement, il a dit les 4 lois de LaRouche, il a dit la séparation des banques doit être mettre en place immédiatement. Il faut mettre en banqueroute les fraudeurs qui ont créé des dettes illégitimes. Il a parlé...
Has been sabotaged by Democrats and Republicans. He's speaking now about the Artemis plan, the space program, a very aggressive policy to get back into space, which is LaRouche's 4th law. And then he has not taken up the question of Hamiltonian credit, but he did speak several times about the American system. Now the question is, how do you do that when you have a Treasury Secretary who's part of the swindler crowd? Mnuchin from Goldman Sachs and who opposes everything that would be represented by LaRouche's 4 laws. I think you have to understand that Russiagate was partly designed to prevent Trump from overturning geopolitics by developing friendly relations with Russia and Putin and with Xi and China. But the other side of it was to keep his attention away from dealing with the economic crisis. And so, as I've written repeatedly, he's made a deal with the devil. During the campaign, he repeatedly ridiculed Hillary Clinton's statement that Obama created a great recovery because of the stock market and the jobs created. Now, what is he saying today about the great economic recovery under his policy? Low unemployment and a high stock market, both of which are frauds. You still have huge portions of the American population not employed productively or even making living wages. And secondly, the stock market bubble could be pulled any moment. It could pop. And in fact, I think if they don't impeach him, that's one of the strategies they have to get rid of him. So rather than attack him for that, because I think he's under enough attack right now, fraudulently, we have to have our forces out as aggressively as possible, fighting for the full implementation of LaRouche's 4 laws. And not just waving at it with a friendly smile, but pushing it through. Now, there are many people I talk to who say, oh, don't worry, when Trump attacks the Federal Reserve, that's what he means. Well, he hasn't said that. And his idea of lower interest rates, while it does coincide with what LaRouche called for, without a Hamiltonian credit policy, those lower interest rates go to whom? The swindlers, so they can buy more of their own stock and push up the stock bubble. So you need a directed economy which includes the full implementation of the 4 laws as a unity. Now, will President Trump do it? Look, I don't know what's going on inside his head any more than I know what's going on with his hair. But I can tell you that he has inclinations in that direction. But this has to be what I was trying to convey in my presentation, that we now have to go directly to LaRouche's policies. And if the American people can be mobilized to do that, and that's why the exoneration is so important, so that people aren't afraid to say the name LaRouche in public. You know, many of our organizers have to fight with us every single day. Their own fears that if you mention LaRouche, people will duck for cover. Well, if those of us who are out front make the fight in the right way and identify the solution as LaRouche's 4 laws and the 4 power agreement for a new Bretton Woods, we can get there. Otherwise, if people sit back and wait for Trump to have a magical moment to do what he said he wants to do, it's not going to happen because the people opposing him, the City of London, Wall Street, the insane Democrats, the neoliberal Republicans, are going to do everything in their power to keep him from doing what's necessary. And so it's up to us.
So, thank you.
No dialogue, unfortunately. We have Mr. Senny wants to give you 30. He wants to also address your.
Oh oui, je vais juste rajouter par rapport à l'interpellation.
I just want to add something about Africa. In 2050, 2 billion people in Africa, and 70% of the population will have under 30 years old. They don't know about colonialism, they have no complex, they will make their own revolution. The world has to be prepared for that. It's already in progress. There is a break between the elite and the youth. And they go back to the Panafricanist. They are building their own destiny. Of course, with the Pan-Africanism, we have a problem. Those who defend Pan-Africanism in Africa have been killed, Thomas Sankara and others. But what we are doing today, this Pan-Africanism today, which is soft today, we have to go back in the political field. With the Schiller Institut, we are working together for years now. It's the second time I came here. Everything we have in Europe, in the rest of the world, to destroy this imperial empire, we are ready to work with LaRouche, with this idea. We have scientists in Africa. We have also Sheikh Anta Diop, who have been destroyed. Scientific, we have been destroyed, because they have tried to push the same idea as LaRouche for development in infrastructure and economics. But we are agree to work together, and Pan-Africanism is politics. Thank you.
Thank you for everyone.